Good evening. My name is Ricky Levine. I'm the director of the Holland Museum, and I use the pronouns she, her. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think we can all be grateful that this is a virtual program, so we all have the opportunity to attend and not have to deal with the dicey weather we're experiencing tonight. Tonight's program is part of the Holland Museum's Cultural Lens series. The series is sponsored by Spectrum Health Zealand Hospital and Warner Norcross and Judd, with additional support from the Holland Zealand Community Foundation and Herman Miller Cares. We are grateful to have the continued support from Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This program is being recorded. We encourage you to select the speaker mode on your Zoom screen, which you can get to with those three dots at the top of your image, your box. And we ask that everybody stay on mute so that everybody can enjoy the program. If you have a question that comes up during the course of the program, feel free to put it in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. If we have time for a Q&A following, we will do so. If we don't have time to get to all of your questions, we've been promised that we can get answers to your questions and we will email them to you in just a couple of days. We do send out a survey after these programs, and we would really appreciate if you would take a moment to fill them out. It really helps us kind of gauge what programs we should be doing. And on that note, if you have a suggestion for an upcoming program, please feel free to share that with us. We really welcome that input. The current temporary exhibit at the museum is currently Election Reflection Memorabilia from Holland, Michigan. It closes on February 22nd, so you have just a couple of short weeks to get to see it if you haven't already. And we hope you'll come by the museum to explore soon. Upcoming programs, which are part of the Cultural Lens series, continue in March. On March 4th, we are pleased to present a program presented by a returning and very popular presenter, Dr. Fred Johnson from Hope College, and Liz Keegan, who is from the Fair Housing Center of West Michigan. Registration for this event is available on the museum website now. And on March 18th, a family program on fair housing will be presented with a reading of the book, The Fair Housing 5 and the Haunted House. This will be done in English, English and Spanish. And details are being finalized, but that will be on our website for registration, we expect by early next week. To stay current with our programs and exhibitions, please feel free to check out our website, but you may also sign up for our weekly newsletter or follow us on social media for information about our ever-changing programs. The museum's current hours are Monday, Friday, and Saturday from 10 to 5. In addition to the exhibits, we have unique items in the gift shop, and remember, memberships make great gifts all year long. We are always open the second Monday of the month in the evening from 4 to 7 p.m. for free. And our next second Monday is February 8th, which is next Monday. We continue to offer these programs at no cost and offer the free accessibility on those Monday evenings because we really want the entire community to have access to us and be able to enjoy this. If you enjoy the programs and what we're doing and you have the capacity, please consider a donation to the museum. You may do that online, at the museum in person, or by phone. So on to tonight. This panel conversation is being offered in partnership with Grounded in Equity, LLC, and its founder, Christine Mwangi. Christine utilizes her entrepreneurial background to develop a curriculum that has helped educate hundreds of marginalized women on critical women's health matters. She is the founder and president of Be a Rose, Inc., a nonprofit organization that combats period poverty and develops community partnerships through which marginalized and underserved people in Grand Rapids gain access to much needed feminine hygiene products free of charge. A global citizen who has lived, worked, and been educated in 3 continents, Africa, North America, and Europe, Christine possesses a lens that she skillfully uses to facilitate courageous conversations about race, privilege, and culture. She lends her expertise and thought-provoking leadership to nonprofits, educational institutions, foundations, and public sector organizations. Christine is the founder and CEO of Grounded in Equity, LLC, a consulting agency committed to partnering with organizations prepared to design and execute critical people management practices or processes, corporate culture shifts, and sustainable systems of change that yield greater social belonging, organizational performance, and possibility. Most recently, Christine launched Pulsing Black, a podcast aimed to provide a platform for storytelling of stories from people holding different Black identities to highlight their diverse experiences in the United States and beyond. Christine hosted our first panel discussion about being an effective ally a few months ago. That program was also recorded and is available for viewing on our website under our past Cultural Lens programs page. Christine is a mentor in my own DEI journey, and she has become a good friend in the process. Thank you, Christine and panel, for joining us and sharing your stories.
Thank you very much, Ricky. I'm not sure if people can see me. Let's see.
We can.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that gracious introduction. I am so humbled and grateful to be here yet again to facilitate the second part of this incredible panel series on allyship. If you haven't already, there is a link to the museum's website where you can find the first part of this series. And I'm sure one of the hosts will put the link up in the chat box, so you can save that to listen to later. So what we did in the first panel is we spoke to a group of people who have had allies in their lives who have helped empower them and give them the courage and strength they needed to navigate really difficult spaces. Today, they nominated those allies to come and be part of this second panel. And so today you get to meet the allies. So for those of you who may be here wondering, you know, how do I become an ally? How do I start that journey? What do I do? How do I go about it? Well, you are in luck because today you get to meet a panel of allies who were nominated by people who deemed them to have been effective in that journey. And I say journey because we are not here to arrive at a destination. When you leave here, we won't give you a certification that says you are now a certified ally. It is a journey of learning and unlearning, because sometimes we need to unlearn the biases and the misconceptions we have about our neighbors in order to build closer relationships. So be prepared to do some unlearning in order to even create space in your life to explore and invite the learning that you need to be effective allies. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel for the evening, starting with Mr. David Baarman. As an entrepreneur, Dave is leveraging many years of innovation history. He is developing and providing innovation processes and intellectual property development. Presently, Dave is CTO of UV Partners, Inc., CTO of Inductive Intelligence, managing partner of Global Battery Solutions, and co-chairman of the Kitchen Promotion Group of the Wireless Power Consortium. Previously at Amway, Dave was manager of the Advanced Technologies Group for Amway Durables Research and Development. Dave's work involved several water treatment products, including the eSpring flagship systems and the new biological filtration systems. He holds 300 United States patents, 460 foreign patents, and has 350 patent applications pending. Wow. Multiple publications, among other awards that include multiple creativity awards, the 2010 to 2011 Michigan Leadership in Innovation finalist, an Edison Award finalist in 2011 and winner in 2012, 2011 Best in Biz Award, and is the 2012 Technology Executive of the Year and 2012 Product Development Management Executive of the Year. Welcome, Dave. Next, we have Lucy Dyer Joswick. Lucy is a lifelong Grand Rapids resident, is a nonprofit professional who dedicates her work to creating equity for our next generation. Her work spans ages 0 to 18 with specialties in serving children experiencing poverty and effectively serving the LGBTQ youth. Lucy presently serves as the executive director of Camp Blodgett, an organization focused on providing access to educational and recreational programming to low-income children. In addition, she serves as a facilitator for the Institute of Healing Racism and as board secretary for the Grand Rapids Pride Center. Next, we have Amy Masko. Amy is a professor of English education at the Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids. She earned her PhD from the University of Denver in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in urban education, and her Master's of Education from Lesley University in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in literacy education. Her research interests include the intersection of race, poverty, and schooling, critical race theory, and comparative international education, particularly education in Ghana. Amy worked in public education and nonprofit community education for over 10 years in both suburban and urban settings in Colorado. She has served on several local and national level boards and is the former president of the American Association for Teaching and Curriculum, AATC. With a strong commitment to equity in education, Amy has been conducting research in K-12 schools and communities for over 15 years. An educational anthropologist, Amy was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship to study village schooling and traditional drumming and dance at the University of Cape Coast, Ghana in 2009. She leads a study abroad program for Grand Valley students to Ghana each summer to study the literature of the transatlantic slave trade and considers how to teach this subject in K-12 schools. Lastly, we have Kyle Kooyers. Kyle has a Master in Divinity has a Master of Divinity and is a program manager for the Kaufman Interfaith Institute of Grand Valley State University. He is responsible for coordinating community-based interfaith engagement, dialogue, and relationship building activities, networking faith and non-faith congregations and organizations, as well as facilitating the efforts of the West Michigan Interfaith Council and its task forces. Originally from Southwestern Pennsylvania, Kyle has spent several years exploring asset-based community development and organizational capacity building in various contexts that address generational poverty and combat food insecurity as an AmeriCorps Vista. Welcome. So although day by day, history seems to be repeating itself before our very eyes, it has never been more crucial than in current times that women, people of color, and the LGBTQIA+ communities more dearly need active allies to counter inequality and injustices. Unfortunately, the cost of active allyship can at times be a barrier to those who intend or hope to be allies to others, even those who consider themselves progressive, aware, or woke. It's not simply that it is easier to disapprove of bigotry passively than it is to actually do something about it, although it is. It's also that many people lack experience resisting the systemic injustices that are baked into American society. So to our learning benefit, the panel today is comprised of people who have who have long been committed to living the values of anti-racism, anti-sexism, and anti-homophobia, and are here with us this evening to teach us the true essence of the saying, when you know better, you do better, by allyship. So let's get started. To start our program this evening, I will ask the first question and ask that each panelist answer it in the following order. We will have Dave, Lucy, Amy, and then Kyle. So being an ally is not just an identity to wear, but it is a verb. So it's not just a noun, it is a verb, an action. It is a lifelong process of building relationships that are based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals or communities. So I'll ask our panelists to please share how they met the person that they became an ally to. So we'll start with Dave.
Sure. So I met Esai. It was originally by phone because we were looking for literally what it came down to is we were looking for someone that was very eager in science to explore new areas. And in this particular case, we needed someone with a very specific specialty. And we looked basically worldwide because we were looking for someone that had experience. And the first conversation was by phone. And Esai represented himself as an amazing individual. He had a great attitude and kind and humble in his publications, etc. And I knew it was just a perfect fit. So we went right from there to flying him in and met him personally when we flew him in for his interview. And we took him under our wing for his visa, etc. And basically gave him a job, which he did a perfect job of. And we had a lot of fun in the wireless power arena, creating the wireless power that's in your cell phone. And if you have an iPhone or a Samsung, we basically created the technology that's in that phone today.
Thank you so much for that. Lucy, I believe.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dave, for that tech and for everything else that you said. But hello, I am Lucy Dyer Joswick, and I met my friend Jazz. I want to say, I'll think of you two different ways. So we met because I knew they were a little bit of a famous Grand Valley student at the time, which was about 6 years ago. And I was putting on a conference where I was seeking individuals to speak about equity topics, and did not know anything about Jazz other than what I could see on the internet, and was really impressed and reached out. And that's where our relationship really began. Happened to be that both of us were having or had just had children, and that bonded us in a way through our conversations. And I think that our ally, it's funny to get that ally relationship, is that what we're going with, really transformed when we both were on the Grand Rapids Pride Center board. We both volunteered there, but when I joined that board, I was able and still continue to see my role as an ally in all sorts of ways because of the intersectionality of that space.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Amy?
Hi. Okay, so the person who nominated me is my cousin, Amy Masko, and she married my cousin. So she's my cousin by marriage. So my meeting her was at a baby shower that she was organizing for her sister-in-law. And, we get along well. We have similar worldviews. And anyone on here who knows Raina knows she's a Spitfire. And so she was definitely came across that way at that shower. And I remember my mom and I both talking about, like, look at Paul's wife. She's fantastic. So that's kind of how I met Raina. And she's now I'd say definitely one of my favorite cousins.
Thank you very much, Amy. Kyle?
So Zahabia Ahmad Usmani and I met at one of the initial meetings of what would become the LIDA, Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance allies at the Herrick Library there in Holland. At this particular meeting, which took place somewhere in the transition from 2016 to 2017. So we all know the wonderful and not so wonderful things unfolding in our world and country at that point. Zahabia was co-leading a breakout session on religious tolerance. And as I was in this session, she struck me as a brilliant and compassionate person who had a very gracious, honest, and grounded way of sharing about her identity as a person of a minority faith living in the Holland Zeeland area. And so I thought, in the lyrical words of George Washington, how come no one can get you on their staff? And in the subsequent months, as Coffin was creating a new program coordinator position, I advocated very hard that we consider Zahabia for that position. And now we've been friends and coworkers for about 4 years now, which has been wonderful. And Christine, to your point about relationships, I even joked with Zahabia about being referred to as her ally when she's one of my best friends. Allyship, I think, is just one piece, though incredibly important nonetheless, of why our friendship is so meaningful. So yes, absolutely. At the core of this work is relationship and empathy, and certainly the trust, consistency, and accountability that come with that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the vast intersections in which allyship has been embodied for all of you. I heard vocation or employment. I heard immigration. I heard academia, family even, and the faith community. I mean, oftentimes even in our own families, there are people who could use our allyship. We could stand in the gap for them and advocate for them, even in our family. The next question will be answered by Amy and Dave in that order. And before we ask this question, let's think about trust. So trust is something that we earn through concerted action. And it is the foundation, as we're hearing, of an effective relationship with an ally. So Amy and Dave, how did you determine that the people to whom you're allies to could use an ally and you decided to take action to be an ally to them? Amy?
So, Raina and I talked about this question actually at the last panel where she was the one speaking. And my perspective on this is not, I mean, we kind of talked about, like, did that happen? Was there ever a moment when that actually happened? And I don't think so. And I can't actually think of that happening for anyone in my life. So what I think about this role of ally is really about a way that you see the world, right? And so an ally just doesn't center themselves, right? So they're looking at the world, or they're looking at their engagement with people and thinking always about whose voice is silenced in this meeting, who's not had an opportunity to speak, who spoke and then nobody listened to. So I think that for me, it's more of an attitude than a moment that happened. It's just more of a perspective of, I try really hard not to center myself and to pay attention to the people around me. And I think that resulted in an allyship relationship.
Thank you so much, Amy. Dave?
Sure. So for me, I think it kind of boiled down to more of my Christian faith. What it really came down to is we had this young man that, he was originally from Cameroon. He went to Cardiff. We were importing him from the UK, and here we're bringing him to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And when we did that, it was obvious that he needed a family. And don't take that wrong, another family. And we basically rallied around him, support, helping him find a car, all a place to live, all the local places to get provisions, places to bring family when they came, when the family visited. I mean, there were just all kinds of things that we rallied around to make him feel as comfortable as possible. And to me, what that is it's just about being a good person. Right. It's not about judgment. It's about seeing the best in someone. And if I look at my career, the best thing about my career has been giving challenges to young individuals that didn't necessarily deserve that challenge, but took it upon their shoulders to do something amazing. And that's always about opportunity, and it's about, you know, that teamwork and friendship that evolves from being given those types of opportunities, doing something together. And when you do things together, you know, there's so much more that can be done. And meaning that you accomplish things that you didn't think you were going to. So that's kind of the core of my career, and that's kind of the core of the relationship.
Thank you so much, Dave. I think I heard you echo very nicely what Amy said, that allyship is not this, it's not always this grand moment that you remember. It's almost just, you know, subtle transitions of extending your humanity to others. And so I learned something today, that by even asking that question, I was assuming that there's a monumental thing that happens, confetti falls out of the sky, oh my God, you've become an ally today. But it's not. Actually, it's just these subtle transitions that are passive if you are an intentional ally, an intentional caring human being, that you extend that care to somebody else. And I really like that. All right. So our third question talks about change. So change is more than adopting an equity lens in the spaces you occupy or the work you do. Organizational change without allyship is not sustainable. And therefore, defining allyship is important for leaders because it helps define what being in a position of power or influence means. So as you strive to be an ally to those who do not have the same privileges in your organization, you can keep that in mind. So the next question is for Kyle and Dave, in that order. Have there been any specific steps you've taken as a result of your role as an ally to inspire institutional change that is beneficial to more than the person to whom you're an ally? Kyle?
Yeah, so I think for us in the world of interfaith, it's always the question of who is represented, whose voice, whose story, whose leadership, in events, on panels, in funding allocations, on staff, in leadership positions for various initiatives. For my work, it's about moving beyond simply having marginalized persons in the space, right? It's about supporting resourcing and following the leadership and wisdom of persons who don't look like me, and seeing that in and of itself as a metric of success. You know, just as we allies are responsible for doing our own self-work, self-examination, and self-education around privilege and systemic inequities, it's also important for our institutions, for Kaufman, to be doing that as well. There's really great material out there around how whiteness and cultures thereof permeate workplaces in ways that create really unhealthy environments for everybody, but especially our BIPOC friends. And so in my workspace, honestly, we've made some progress there, but we still have a ways to go.
Thank you very much. Dave?
You know, and I would kind of follow up from, you know, the last set of comments. You know, for me, it was more about taking and making diversity successful through teamwork and working together. What that did is it created an opportunity for the organization to say, wow, that works. And when people see that works, they want more of what works and what's special. We created a very special environment, a very amazing culture of teamwork and success. And you know, success breeds success. So it became something the organization wanted more of. And you know, that became a lot of questions about how do you do that? You know, boy, we should bring in more visas. We should we should seek more diversity. And it really became kind of a nice pathway, you know, to making that happen. Now, unfortunately, if you don't facilitate that properly, you know, it doesn't create the same outcomes. But when it's done well, it's really nice to see.
Thank you, Dave. I really like that vein that you continue to speak of empowerment, that becoming someone's ally does not mean you continue to shield them, as it were, to whatever circumstances that are marginalizing them, but it is realizing what their talents and skills are that they're bringing to the table, highlighting those, and to Kyle's point, even following their lead at times, because whatever the circumstances are that are causing them to be marginalized, this person is more than that. We are a conglomerate, a sum of many beautiful talents and things that we bring to the table. So just seeing me as a woman and wanting to be my ally should not define our entire relationship. You have to get past that. Once you are my ally, then realize, oh my God, this woman is dynamic in this way and or the other. And how can we leverage that, i.e. to Dave's point, for the success of this organization? Thank you very much for those answers. So again, we know and we reiterate with empathy that many allies face barriers to allyship that they may not even be aware of, whether through language, staying quiet around certain family or friends, or countless other harmless decisions. Many allies find it difficult to see the ways their actions can and do target the very communities they want to serve. So to Lucy and Kyle, in that order, what advice would you give someone who is not convinced of being an ally and think they would be alienating other people in their social or professional circles by being an ally to some?
Oh, well, I want to say a yes and to that question. Meaning, in my journey, I have lost peers and friends because of being an ally. And so I think that that is an important part of my recognition of to me, it's their loss. It's the people that I lost was due to me calling them in, or them not really understanding what allyship is. And I think that Amy phrased it really well when it's not centering yourself, and it is about looking at the table and so to speak, and seeing whose voices are being silent or who isn't speaking up. And one of the things that I, in my ally journey, have realized, to answer the first part of your question, that was harming me in becoming an ally in my early, I'll say in my 20s, when I had these, thanks to Grand Valley in the 90s, these wake up moments that I had been shielded from my white privilege, or not aware. And when this white consciousness was awoken, I think that I might have been, definitely, people can call me out if they want, the annoying white girl know-it-all in the first stage. And so I believe that because I was in that phase of learning, and I am such a loud and talkative and sharing individual, that was a turnoff. And it was really helpful for me to have, at that point, my first job was at Girl Scouts. And it was a wonderful experience for me to work with a group of all women who were very diverse in a lot of different ways, from their sexual orientation to their religion, to their race, to their class, and have friendships formed where women could be very honest with me about how my behavior made them uncomfortable, about how my behavior could make others uncomfortable, and about how what I really needed to do more of was listen and less of talk about what I've learned. I'd say the second phase in that was learning that it doesn't need to be about recognition. I don't think that was something that I was seeking in the beginning, but I do believe that that might have been what other white folk or people that I could be seen as an ally to might have perceived. And so it is not about, I'll say, for example, not to put this, but, saying, I'm going to be on this panel tonight. Look at me being a great ally. And if you want to share the panel because it's an important conversation for folks to be a part of, then that is a different message. And so I think mine has been really the evolution of realizing that being an effective ally is not about me. It is about me understanding how I need to step in and fill those gaps and when I need to shut up, which is my long-standing challenge.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Kyle?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lucy. If anybody needs a coffee break, now's a good time. Um, I like to, Zahabia mentioned this in the last discussion, the difference between ally and accomplice, or seeing allies as accomplices, right? In a sense, we do very much have something to lose, but it will very rarely be our life, our health, or our well-being. And that's not the same for many of our neighbors. The stakes, if you will, are so different. And that's why we can and ought to embrace that discomfort and uncertainty. I think we have to continually examine our privilege. And in this case, to this question, fragility. Why am I so apprehensive? Why do I fear compromising that relationship? Is it that I would be alienating those around me, or that they might alienate me? And at the end of the day, like, we're not looking to intentionally alienate, isolate, or cut ties with people around us. In fact, just the opposite. We as allies want to draw them in and foster good learning and growth. I mean, wouldn't it be great if everyone was equity minded and motivated to work towards systemic change? That's the dream, right? But as allies and persons of privilege, we have the capacity to be in those hard conversations and those long game approaches toward broadening people's minds. You know, for me and those like me, and by that I mean white, cis Christian men, especially in West Michigan, consider your own learning in the journey, that's what I want to say. When your mind was changed, when your worldview was expanded, what did that journey look like? Could you help guide this person, perhaps this very difficult person, on their own journey? Because you have the ability and the responsibility to try, as do I.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you so much for that. And as you were explaining that, a really nice question came into the chat that is important. If you don't mind expanding on your comment about allyship versus accomplice. So what would you deem to be the difference between an ally and an accomplice, Kyle?
Without like getting too deep into semantics, I'll just say that it is possible for an ally to approach that work more passively, right? I've put a sign in my front yard, I've hung a flag on my house, I post things on Facebook. But again, to what I was just saying, when I use the term accomplice, I just mean it's somebody who's taken a risk. Think about legalese. If you are an accomplice, you are indictable in the offense, right? So as we think about the phrase good trouble, you are in the trouble with persons that you are looking to stand alongside of.
Wow, I love it. I like it. That is so good. Thank you, Kyle. And, you know, I shared just yesterday, just giving an example of how relevant it is to be an ally or to stand up for what is right. I gave an example of a time that I went back home to Kenya, where I am a native of. I'm from Kenya. After I started doing DEI work. So I go to Kenya with my parents, and we're in the car. It's my mom, my dad, and myself. We go to a gas station, and in Kenya, they pump your gas like they do in Jersey. So the young man who was going to pump our gas comes to my dad's side of the car. Dad rolls down the window, and dad addresses him in our tribal language. And for context, I come from the Kikuyu tribe, which holds privilege in my country. And I said, Dad, why would you speak Kikuyu? We're in Nairobi, the capital, right? The melting pot of our country. You should either speak English or Swahili. He said, by now, Kikuyu is the third language of this country. He's better learn it, or something to that effect. And I was so mortified with my DEI equity lens, fresh from America. I was like, my God, you cannot treat people this way. Mind you, my daddy's not going to change, right? He probably still does it today, but I wasn't, discouraged. I made a point to, in that moment, as he was pumping gas, to tell dad, that's not okay. he is not from our, because he didn't respond. And I could tell he understood some, didn't understand some. And I said, that's not okay, you know? And so in this work, understand it will not always be received. It may not always even be exemplified by those who you step in the gap in their presence. They may not take your lead and become allies themselves, but that should not stop your humanity and those subtle transitions that we mentioned of being an effective ally. So I still will stand up even to my daddy and say, but by now they know with the work I do, anyway. Nonetheless, so as those who are listening try to figure out what they're going to do or where they can incorporate allyship in their lives, some may find that they need to face some hard truths and become comfortable in the discomfort of allyship. So to this end, I urge us all to center a spirit of empowerment and grace in this moment for all who are in our listening audience and ourselves as we recommit to allyship. So in your own words, Amy and Lucy, what would you like to see 5 years from now with regard to allyship in our community?
Okay, so so when I think about 5 years from now, I mean, I hope we're in a position that allyship is just natural, right? That we're all in the same fight together. That we don't see that I, as a white woman, don't see that my job is to create space for Black and Brown voices, or that it's just we're all in this fight for equity. It's all of our problem, not a few people or a handful of people who are willing to help or make space. I'd like it to be less of a helping kind of position. I'd like the power to be more equalized, right? I'd like there to not be the power centered in whiteness. So a world that's not based in white supremacy, I guess, would be my wish for 5 years from now. But when I think about how to get there, there's work that has to be done. And one of the things that people often say, so I have an academic background in race, you know, so I study race, I think about race, I write about race. So people sometimes, when I'm having conversations with white people, for example, they might say, well, you know, you're more advanced in this, or you know more about this. But, you know, it's so available to all of us. I mean, there are so many great books that keep being published on this. There's people you can follow on Twitter and social media. So one of the things I always say to people is spend time like living in Black Twitter, right? So get on Twitter and follow Black activists, Black and Brown activists, and then sit quietly in that space, right? Read the tweets, follow the threads, Google what you don't know, don't ask questions, don't engage. It's a Black and a brown space. But as a white person, I think of like Beverly Tatum. So she's a psychologist, she's the former president of Spelman, and she wrote this book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, or something like that. And in that book, she says, racism is like a smog that you breathe, right? You can't control it. You walk outside your house in Los Angeles and you breathe in smog, whether you want to or not. And that's, racism is the smog in the US. And I think if you spend some time breathing, you know, other perspectives. So you sit, you read, right? You read, you watch movies, you engage as much as you can, but sit in the space where Black and Brown people are talking and debating issues and quietly learn. That's breathing in some other perspective. And I think that's how we grow in our equity and our move toward equity, is by spending time in those spaces. Even when we live in, you know, kind of white communities or segregated communities, like we often do in West Michigan.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you. Lucy?
Yes. Wow. I just get so in like watching and listening to the others. 5 years from now, I agree. I mean, what I really want, if I could pretend to have national control, I would say that things like, sorry to say the political thing, but I'm going to, like the things that were just removed and now are reinstated about critical race theory and talking about white privilege and having an actual curriculum that teaches our actual accurate history, 1619. There's a lot of opportunities for us to really make a structural and systems change. And I think that that requires, unfortunately, a big reckoning from the top down after the last few years that we've experienced of saying that this country is based on white supremacy. And so racism is the smog that we're breathing, but really I think it's white supremacy that is the water that we're swimming in, you know, and until we truly address that, it's hard for me to keep answering the 5 years. And so that's what I hope is going to happen. I think that what I can do within my my reach individually, and what I hope for this West Michigan community, is that conversations like this become normalized to where when you're talking about race, you, or any ism, let's say, you are talking about the reason why it was created. So let's say you're talking about classism. Let's talk about why poverty, how poverty was created, and that intersects back in race. Let's talk about how race was created and how race was structured. You know, talk about heteronormative culture, and just there's so much learning that we first need to do. And so my hope is that this community doesn't just want to be impatient and get to the solution, because that's what I hear so often is just tell me what to do. Tell me how to do it. I want to do it tomorrow. And I think that it's dangerous if we don't learn first and we try to act too fast. And so I would hope that we're in this normative space of learning, and that it's centered in listening to the voices of those who have been oppressed, and much less about our inability to accept the reality that our country is what it is, and that accepting that cognitive dissonance going to one side. I think once we can really accept that as the reality, as uncomfortable as it's going to make you, because it makes me uncomfortable every moment of the day. I feel like if you pay attention to it, it will. But sit in that, and then once you sit in that, you just have to do something. I feel like.
Wow. Thank you so much, Amy and Lucy. And, you know, as I was listening to you, when you talk about how you envision a more equitable world where even allyship is not a thing, these discussions are not a thing, it makes me think of the uptick in demand for diversity, equity, and inclusion officers in the corporate, nonprofit, academic, you name it, sectors, right? And the other day I told somebody, you know what makes me so sad? It's not even so much like these roles that I don't even understand, like the fact that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is somebody's job title in America in this day and age. I told somebody, if when we go to the US embassy to get our visas as immigrants to come here, they play a video about what it's really like to be in America as a Black person, I don't think I would have come. Even at the age of 11, I think I would have had the sense to tell my parents, I don't know if I want that life. Like, what do we not have here in Kenya that we are going to be under this level of oppression? And like I mentioned, having left a tribal identity that was of privilege in our own country. And so to move here and have to embody an identity that was not my own for 11 years and learn how to be in that identity, and then have to even identify who could be an ally, it has been a difficult journey. But I want to encourage people that allyship is so much a way of life. I'll give you a really good example, and I'll tell you a short story of a lady named Wendy Orr. And I'll make sure I forward this to her because I like talking about her, and she's a very dear friend of my family. We call her Aunt Wendy now. She's been in my family forever. So Wendy Orr was a professor of economics at the University of London in the 80s, probably before then, before I was even an idea, thought I was not born. And so she happened to be a guest lecturer in the university my mom was attending in Bristol. I believe it was Bristol. And after the lecture, as you normally would, some people do, you go up to the lecturer and say, hey, thank you so much for sharing. How can I stay in touch with you? Because they weren't a professor in their university. They exchanged contacts. I don't know how many times they talked, corresponded, or saw each other after that. I do know that fast forward, that was in the 80s, fast forward to 1994, my mom and dad took my sister and I to London for a visit. And that visit was monumental because, put Wendy aside, we were there to meet a really old man named Johnson, whose wife Hilda is the woman my sister is named after. And the reason this couple was important was because they were allies for my parents at a time in those days in England. Two Black international students really needed what Dave was saying, somebody to be a second family, show them the ropes, show them how they need to govern themselves, even to be safe in England in those days, being Black, to the point where my mom named my sister after that old woman. So then we met Wendy. My mom said Wendy was a great friend. We stayed with her for a few days, and that was that. 2009, I moved to England for grad school. I'm 23 now. Wendy met my mom before my mom was married, before I was born. I'm 23 now. The first person to contact me was Wendy. I was in Manchester. She was in London. She said, Christine, I have already arranged for my nephew, Julian, and his partner, Serena, to meet with you and meet with you weekly or however often you need to take care of you. I want you to come to London and see me as often as you need, etc. And I was like, oh my God. At first I was like, is my mom sending people to check on me? I mean, I know I'm in another country, but this is extreme. And then she's using Wendy so that it doesn't seem like it came from her. You know how you parents do. So I was very confused. And so I decided to meet with these folks, and I was like, oh, it couldn't hurt. They ended up being my really good friends. To this day, we have a group chat that we correspond. But Wendy continued to be an ally. When it was time for me to get an internship, it was very competitive. She took my resume to the pharmacy near her house and told Mr. Patel, who owned the pharmacy, you need to give this girl an internship. I don't care what it takes. You know, I live in this community. I've lived in this community for a long time. You need to hire this girl. I know this because he told me a white lady threatened me to hire you. That's why I'm calling you. And I said, oh my God, Wendy is too much. So her allyship was extreme because that's how Wendy is. But when she believes in something and believes in you and knows that she has the identity and privilege to step in the gap, she does it so radically and almost offends folks, but she doesn't care because she understands that without her voice, I couldn't have gotten that opportunity. I don't have a relationship with Mr. Patel. I may have had a resume, but how many other pharmaceutical students had that same resume? And so she went there and said, she leveraged her position in the community. She leveraged that she was a customer there who got her little nice things in the pharmacy and her medication there. And she leveraged everything she could. So when this man called me, because I didn't call him, he said, a white woman threatened me. So I need to talk to you and figure out, like, when do you want to start your internship? I don't have one in this pharmacy, but I have a spot in another pharmacy of mine. And that's how I ended up, doing my residency, was in one of his pharmacies. So I say all this to say, this woman was friends with my mom for a very long time. They didn't keep in touch too often, but when the opportunity arose again, 23 years later, she was an ally to me when initially that relationship started with my mother. So it is truly a lifelong journey if you are indeed committed to it. And to this day, she sends me Christmas cards. She never forgets my birthday. And that's just how it is. So when you ask, even when we asked about, at what moment did you become an ally? I have no clue how many people or in how many times in this woman's life she has leveraged her identity to stand in the gap for others. So I say this to say I am a beneficiary of effective, lifelong, generational allyship, but I am also a person who steps in the gap and is an ally to others because I have seen the change it can bring about. So I really encourage all of you listening today to not give up. It is hard. I will ask that you find support. When you decide you want to be an ally, not even decide, when you say, you know what, enough is enough. I want to do what I can. I want to do my part. Get some support, because there may be times when you lose friends, you lose some relationships. You want to make sure you have the support you need to keep going when the going gets tough. Okay. So we have arrived at our last question. What gift, as I have just talked about the gift of effective allyship to me, what gift has effective allyship given you as an ally in your life? And I'll ask Dave to go first, then Lucy, then Amy, and lastly, Kyle.
I like that one. When you think about the gift, you can position your life to be founded around a lot of different things. A lot of people, pile up riches. Some people pile up accomplishments. In all reality, none of those things make you happy. The real reality is what you do for other people. And the gift that the Ally program gave me is I didn't know I was an ally till I was asked. In other words, I had done the right things. I had taken a risk on someone. I had sponsored someone in an appropriate way, built a relationship with Esai, created a family environment, that will always be there. And to see him come back and suggest me for this program, those are the moments in life that are confirming that you're making some good decisions and you're treating people the right way, and putting people first. I don't really care who that is. That those are the most powerful moments, is when someone lets you know that you put them high, and you held them high, and you made them important in your life, and you touched them that way. So that's really the biggest gift, is having someone reach back and inform you that it made a difference.
Wow. Thank you, Dave. I really like that. Lucy?
I think my answer is perspective, that I've had a lot of gifts of perspective shifts. I think that's most often happened in my journey as being trying to be an anti-racist ally. But it has also happened in my journey in other ways as well. I have a lot of intersectioning. I'm a bisexual woman, and I am married to a man, and I carry a lot of privilege within that identity. And so I have had a lot of gifts of kindly being called in or called out, and told how I could utilize my privilege better. And I really appreciate those perspective shifts in both senses of the gift. And actually, Jazz gives them to me in all sorts of directions. But really, whenever I have the opportunity to check myself, I think that's a gift. And that took a while to get to, because it used to make me cry. And then you already heard that story. But really, once you can get to, I think, getting to that point of seeing it as a gift that I might need to sit with and make change on, that perspective can be life-changing.
Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you, Lucy. Amy?
Well, I think I'll second what Lucy says about perspective. I think that there's a lot of missteps that happen when you get in good trouble, right? When you live in that space of good trouble, you make a lot of missteps as a white person. And there's times when with Raina, even where I'm making apologies for, we talk about some issue that came up, and I'll say, okay, well, I'll bring it up and then you support it, thinking it'll help the people in the room if they hear a white person say it, right? And then I realized, like, wait, then I'm taking the space, right? And so I spend a lot of time kind of apologizing for those missteps. And similar to Lucy, when in my younger years, I was, maybe strong and wrong, right? So I had a big voice and probably alienated a lot of people. And so I think there's lots of growth that happens when you keep yourself in this space. And I do think it's intentional to keep yourself in this space. It's very easy as a white person to just pull into a comfort zone, right? And I keep reminding myself that there's no growth in the comfort zone and there's no comfort in the growth zone. And I live in a pretty uncomfortable place most of my life. And to me, that's a real gift.
Wow, thank you so much, Amy. And lastly, Kyle.
Sorry, I got a pop-up message. So I made a list here: inspiration, creativity, humility, community, personal identity, and a wider culinary palette. Again, the work of allyship, it's not always easy. It is not always fun, and it is never done. So for me, the gift and reward is in the friendship and relationship that fuels my ally work, right? With the love and urgency that comes from caring for a person, not just a cause or a status. If I can wax theological for just a moment, allyship has really expanded my sense of the divine and how and where I see God at work. It's given me perspective and purpose that in humility and in decentering myself, I find immense contentment and joy. I'm reminded of a quote from philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who says, in a certain sense, the life of one loving is completely squandered on the existence of others. In self-sacrifice, they are willing to perish, completely and wholly transformed into being simply an active power in the hands of God, or to this conversation, the hands of equity and justice.
Wow. I was just typing in the chat before I realized I needed to come on. It's hard to multitask on these Zooms. Just the many gifts, my goodness, the many gifts that allyship gives us, some that we expect and others that we don't, but just how valuable and how incredible a journey it is for both parties or both communities, as it were. So I am so grateful for these transparent, vulnerable moments we have had this evening. But we do have some questions for the audience, and time permits us. The first is, please name a good example of a person we may be familiar with that is a good ally representative. Can you think of somebody we may be familiar with that has exemplified good allyship? If you can think of one. I know I gave my Aunt Wendy, but y'all don't know her, but I don't know. In her circles, she's known, so that's gonna be mine. Whoop. I'll go with Kyle first. I feel like Kyle might know somebody.
Sure. I mean, I guess as a historical example and one from the interfaith community, the example of Rabbi Abram Heschel and his work in walking alongside of Dr. King. And again, you kind of see him off to the side in the pictures, but he's not one that's quoted often. He's not one that's centered often in those spaces. He was there to show up because his faith, his Jewish faith, compelled him to do so, and took risk at that. Status risk, again, well-being risk, but not to the extent of the folks he was there to stand with. So that level of humility and conviction, I think, inspires me, and that it can happen across vast differences in worldview.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kyle. Dave, do you know of anybody we may be familiar with who has exemplified great allyship?
I mean, I go back to the biblical, references. There's so many examples of, taking someone under your protection, and but just offhand, if I think about that, Martin Luther and that type of movement is what comes to top of mind.
Thank you so much, Dave. Lucy?
It's interesting because my mom used to say Jesus is the original in terms of this kind of work. So I am not a I can't speak further than that because I'm not an interfaith philosopher like some of us in the room, but I do agree with what that sentiment means. But my public answer, I had the opportunity to meet Bob Woodrick, who helped found the Woodrick Institute at Aquinas. Not know him well, but have him be part of my launch into this study. And a few things that I remember from his sharing was be ready to get uncomfortable. And I think that I didn't really know how true that was going to be, but that was a really important lesson. And then the next one was get prepared to use your resources and take risks in ways that you wouldn't have before. And so one of the questions that he asked when I heard him present, and this was before I had children, before I even thought of having children, and said, public schools, do you plan to send your kids to public schools? And it was not a judgment question, sorry for those that are feeling that, but said, if you really want to make an impact, you need to put yourself within it. So if you really want to make an impact in oppression, you need to be willing to put the sacrifice into that. And that was the analogy that he showed. But I did that really motivated me in a way. I think I already was planning on sending my future kids then to public schools, but I had no idea how much of a challenging decision that would be and how many others I would see struggle through that. So I was grateful for his pre-warning.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Amy?
So Peggy McIntosh is who comes to mind for me. So she wrote the seminal article that probably lots of people have read or heard about, is that Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack of White Male Privilege. And she's this little old lady. And I actually am not even sure if she's still around. I think so. But several years ago, maybe 2012 or 2013, she was the keynote speaker at the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance's Summit on Racism. It was held at Hope that year, Hope College. And she spoke, and with her was, his last name is Vasquez. His first name escapes me, but a Latino man, a Latinx man. And he, she said, Hugh Vasquez is his name. So she said, when she was talking, they did a workshop together on privilege and white privilege. And she said she doesn't do any speaking anymore unless she can bring a person of color with her and they get paid the same amount she does. And she's really famous and well paid. So Hugh Vasquez was not at the time, right? He was sort of up and coming at the time. And so to me, that was a beautiful example of allyship.
Wow. Thank you, Amy. Wow, that's so powerful. Thank you so much for your answers. The second question was, what can we do to make sure our local law enforcement is treating people of color equally and in a non-discriminatory manner? So in the spirit of honoring the person who asked this question, but in relation to our panel discussion tonight, I suppose what we can discuss in light of that is, how can effective allyship advocate for those who may not be being treated fairly by law enforcement? Have you seen some effective allyship that has addressed this particular issue that we know is prevalent in some of our communities? I can start this discussion because in my time here in West Michigan, I did work as a Swahili interpreter for refugee adults and families and youth, etc. And so oftentimes the role of an interpreter is to be a cultural broker, is to be a go-between when people of two different cultures are not on the same wavelength. Although I'm there to directly interpret a message, there were times when I had to stop the person who is delivering the message to the refugee family or person and say, hey, what you're trying to explain or ask of this person right now is culturally not appropriate. Here is how it will be interpreted. Please allow me to interpret it in a way that will honor what you're asking and get the response you need. Oftentimes, you're called upon to interpret in legal settings. It could be at a police station or a court hearing. What always used to go into my mind was, I wonder what those first few moments are like when somebody, for example, gets pulled over or gets called by an agency that is of the legal system, and they don't understand the culture, they have a language barrier, and they're afraid. And so as an interpreter, I often found myself, when I could, because in those moments, of course, things have been de-escalated, whether painfully or not, for people to have a conversation, I always tried to be a broker. And if it took stopping the conversation and saying, hey, this is my voice as an interpreter saying that this, this situation is culturally going to go against the grain and not achieve what you want. And oftentimes I found that that was quite effective in allowing the law enforcement or otherwise person be able to truly humanize the person that they were questioning. Are there other examples, in your opinion, that you have seen effective allyship play out in situations where people were being treated unjustly? Lucy?
Yeah, in 2 leadership programs that I've taken, I've had the opportunity to do police ride-alongs, and I am I'm a social justice social worker, I suppose. And so that for me gave me insight into a potential solution. And I don't, get my personal answer again. If Lucy were ruling we would have a cop and a social worker always together. We had the opportunity where we had to spend 24 hours both, and I did these 10 years apart from each other. Interestingly, I was paired with a white woman both times. Wish it would have given me a different perspective, but in both of those situations, we had to do de-escalation. And I found that there was a lot of prejudgment in both 2 different times of what we were going to walk into. And I'd ask that question because I'm me, of like, who do you think this is going to be? Or well, tell me about what you normally see these type of situations. And it was brought to my attention in both scenarios, and I think we agreed that challenging each other just in those 24 hours and creating a relationship made the work better. It would have been so much better if that was really a permanent, but just in 24 hours, having that opportunity to say, well, how might you have gone into that different? Or me to observe their behavior and then say, can I tell you how to do that from a strengths-based perspective and teach even what that means, was really helpful. So if I had a solution to answering that systemically, I would say it's all going to lead back to that education and that empathy and that understanding that we are not the center of the universe, and that we must understand what kind of lenses have been put into our perspectives, and how we might need to change those lenses in order to be effective, in that case, officers.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lucy. And our last question that I'll pose to Amy and Kyle, how can we be better allies? Oh, and Dave, I'm not going to leave you out, Dave. How can we be better allies in the COVID age? Wow, that's a powerful question because so many inequalities and injustices have been unearthed during this time of the global pandemic. And in fact, the reason that so much momentum has been gained in the pursuit of justice is because the whole world was at a standstill to listen. We were all at a standstill to listen. Amy, how can we be better allies in this COVID age?
So I think social media is a blessing and a curse, right? But I think there's an opportunity in social media to like lend your voice or lend your support when you see a conflict. So I'll give you an example that just happened. So a friend of mine, a white woman, posted about Amanda Gorman, who was the poet at Joe Biden's inauguration. And she posted this, like a short essay, right? Like a Facebook essay that a Black woman wrote that said, all of you white women or white people who are posting how articulate she is, it's so offensive. So knock it off, right? And gives kind of a history as to why calling Black people articulate is offensive and not a compliment. So a friend of mine posted that, and a lot of her friends, white women, got on and said, "I disagree." Right? I think it was a compliment. I did post that, and I meant it as a compliment. And so there was an argument ensuing. There were a couple of Black women on there trying to explain, and the white women were just overpowering it, right? And so then I jumped in to that conversation. I didn't know any of them. I only know the one woman, and I actually only have a Facebook relationship with her. I don't know her in person. I met her in a group for allies, right? And so I jumped into that conversation, gave some examples about sexism, right? How sometimes we just have to believe, as my argument was, sometimes we just have to believe Black people. And so just like we want men, when we say, complimenting me on my body at work is offensive, and men saying, well, no, I meant it as a compliment. Men need to sit back and realize it doesn't matter what you meant. It's taken as a compliment. And for the most part, I think that has happened. Of course, not perfectly, but it's certainly better than racism in this case. And so the conversation, people were like, oh, good point, right? So this is an example of where normally I sat on there and thought, it's not really my business. It's not my group of friends. It's her whole group of friends, right? But sometimes if you've got a way to explain it, or you can offer support, right, to this, in this case, I was trying to offer support to the two Black women who were trying to make their case and they weren't being heard. That opportunity comes up a lot. And in fact, I'm a member of this group that's white people who are, a Black friend of mine said, can I put you all in a group that I can call on you, or we can call on each other when these things are happening on our Facebook wall or our Twitter feed, that you'll jump on and support us. Right. And so that's online allyship, right? That's perfect in the time of COVID when we're all kind of living in this online space.
Oh my gosh, as you were talking, Amy, I had this, because sometimes I think in cartoon mode. So I had this vision of, like, anytime I feel distressed, I can see like a swarm of white women, like bees, like coming to save me. That when you were describing that group and the ability to be called upon, I was like, oh my gosh, I wish there was a button I could press and like these white women come and unfortunately they'll come and say exactly what I was saying, but for some reason,
Right.
it will be received and accepted and maybe even actioned because they said it. But wouldn't it be nice if anybody who's marginalized in any way had a button, like an ally button, where it doesn't matter where you are, you can press the ally buttons and allies come out of nowhere like superheroes and save the day. But the fact that we even need that as human beings is in itself an issue. Kyle and Dave, how can we be better allies during COVID times?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump also to that point of the ally button. I'm imagining the end of Avengers Endgame. It's like on your left, and then everybody like pours onto the scene, So I think Amy so beautifully touched on like the social media realm of allyship. I think I'll focus more on personal. We're going through a tremendous time of collective loss, grief, trauma. And that is certainly disproportionate. Like I'm experiencing that as a person of immense privilege. So I think that welcomes us, people like me, into the empathy-based work of beginning to understand the disparity of trauma, grief, loss, harm, struggle, strife that others in our community are experiencing. And so I guess my answer here is relatively simple. Be human and reach out. Don't be afraid to ask the question of how are you doing right now? Listen to the story. As Amy said, validate the story, honor the story, even though it may be vastly different than your own experience. That's okay. During the spring, I was very pleased that like institutionally, Kauffman was able to pivot and kind of mobilize our interfaith network to help address a food security issue in the Roosevelt Park community, because the school system did not identify Cesar Chavez as a place where they would be doing food distribution. And so without a food pantry and walkable distance, we pulled together a bunch of community leaders to kind of, again, it was just a Band-Aid fix for that one season, but it came because a number of us were just hopping on a Zoom call every week to say, how's everybody doing? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? That happened institutionally. You can do it very personally. Again, it's even as much as just sending a Facebook message. Hey, no, we haven't talked in a while, but things suck right now. And I just want to hear how you're doing. Showing up and being present for people is huge. And like the common theme here is allyship equals friendship equals relationship. So check in on the folks in your life, just as you would like folks to check in on you.
Wow. Thank you, Kyle. And lastly, Dave.
Yeah, my mind was right in the same vein as Kyle. You know, this COVID has done this remarkable thing to put us in isolation. And, you know, when you're in isolation, you know, for those of us that are, you know, from West Michigan or whatever, and you have family nearby, it's not as isolated as someone that may be from out of the country, or someone that, you know, might not know the same customs, et cetera. So, you know, it's important, you know, as you get this disease that creates this dehumanizing element to it, by forcing change in our in our culture, it's even more important that we step past that and become even more human, right? You know, and to Kyle's point, reaching out and taking that risk, and you know, being there, you know, and being human. We all need to feel that right now, and that's you know, I think that can't go understated.
Oh, sorry. I'll just also jump in and say, like, as we are all sort of still stuck at home, now is a great time to be doing the learning and self-education work of watching the YouTube videos, reading the books, following Black Twitter, whatever it might be. Like, now we kind of have the time and space to do that. So that is a crucial building block for ally work. So yeah, don't negate the importance of your own learning, even as we're trying to figure out a way forward right now.
And if I can jump in real quick too, during the pandemic, the one thing I think that the people who need our allyship right now are the elderly getting signed up for a COVID vaccine. I mean, the whole system is set up to be computerized, and anybody who's stopped working before the age of computers is having a really difficult time. So find those elderly people in your community and help them sign up.
Wow, thank you, Amy. Yeah, the digital divide has certainly been something in this time where we have to learn and work from home. So many have suffered if they are, i.e., IT illiterate, or don't even have the hardware, or you know, even the patience to navigate some of these websites and to access the services they so dearly need. Wow, thank you all so much. I cannot thank you enough on behalf of myself and the Holland Museum. I know Ricky's going to jump on here a little bit, but thank you so much to our audience. Thank you for supporting this program. It is being recorded and will be available for your viewing at leisure, and for sharing with those who couldn't join us. Thank you so much, Ricky.
Yes, thank you. This was an incredible panel. It was an incredible discussion. I learned so much from all of you, and I appreciate your transparency and your honesty and your ideas. I think everybody here feels that way. I want to give, we have a few minutes left in case anybody has any questions that they can want to put it in the chat right now. I just put in the link to our previous ally program. So if you want to take a look at that, and if you don't get a chance to do that, just go to our website and go to our DEI page, Past Cultural Lens Programs. We will be getting this program up. As Christine said, it should be up on our website by early next week, if not before. I'm just looking to see if there's any questions in the chat. There's a whole lot of thank yous. Michelle, are you seeing any questions that I might have missed? I don't think so.
No, I don't see any either.
Yeah. If other questions come to mind, feel free to let us know through the museum and we'll get them to Christine, who I'm sure will share it with the panel. Thank you again for spending this winter night with us. I'm glad we could all get together and stay warm independently. And good luck with everybody's journey. This is, as everyone has said, this is not something that's going to happen immediately. The fact that you're here is an incredible start to that process, or a continuation of a process that you may already be on. And I think you should all be applauded for diving into it. So thank you all and have a great night. Stay safe and warm.